All right, so today we're going to kind of a surprising battleground, I guess you could say, World War II,
Yeah.
Antarctica. As the world is, embroiled in this conflict on multiple fronts, Britain decides to launch this secret mission to the frozen South.
Yeah, it's really interesting because this mission called Operation Tabarin, it's not about directly fighting the Axis powers. It's really a hidden story, I think, of strategic maneuvering and geopolitical jockeying for position in a region that most people wouldn't think about when they're thinking about World War II.
Right, and for this deep dive, we're drawing from an episode of Dan Stow's History Hit. And the episode features Camilla Nickey from the UK Antarctic Heritage Trust and Professor Klaus Dodds, who's an expert on Antarctic geopolitics.
Yeah.
And they really paint a fascinating picture of this kind of forgotten chapter of history.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget that in the early 20th century, before petroleum really
Okay.
took over, that whale oil was a vital resource, and Antarctica was a prime whaling ground.
So controlling Antarctica basically meant controlling a pretty valuable commodity. I'm starting to see why Britain, even in the middle of a world war, would be interested in kind of, shoring up their foothold down there.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't just about whales. There's this geopolitical layer as well.
Hmm.
Argentina and Chile were starting to assert their own claims to parts of Antarctica, and that was a direct challenge to British sovereignty. Even the United States was beginning to show an interest in the region.
Oh, so Britain felt the need to kind of solidify its claim and maybe, keep an eye on potential rivals, even allies at that point. It almost sounds like this high-stakes game of risk playing out on the icy continent.
Yeah, a very apt analogy, I think. And, while the threat from German raiders had diminished by 1943, there were still concerns about potential disruptions to shipping routes. And believe it or not, there was even this lingering fear, however kind of outlandish it might seem now, of a potential Japanese invasion of the Falklands.
Wow, the Falklands. So you've got, a lot of interconnected concerns here, right?
Yeah.
Strategic resources, territorial disputes, and even the, faintest echoes of potential enemy action. That's a lot to juggle while also fighting a world war on multiple fronts.
Indeed, it is. And if we dig a little deeper into how Operation Tabarin was put into motion, it was conceived in January 1943. It was a joint effort between the Colonial Office and the Admiralty. And you get the sense that there was a bit of a scramble to pull it all together.
Yeah, you can imagine. Finding a suitable ship, assembling a crew, equipping them for a journey to Antarctica,
Hmm.
all, well, a world war is raging.
Absolutely. And, even the name of the operation adds a little bit of intrigue to this.
I'm all ears. Where does the name Operation Tabarin come from? It doesn't exactly scream, top secret Antarctic mission.
Well, get ready to be surprised. It was named after a Parisian nightclub, the Bal Tabarin, which was known for its, shall we say, lively and somewhat chaotic atmosphere. According to our experts, it turned out to be a rather fitting name.
A top secret mission to Antarctica named after a Parisian nightclub. That's not something I was expecting. I have a feeling there were more surprises in store as we dive deeper into this.
Most definitely. Stay tuned because next we're going to explore what life was like for the men who were stationed in this, frozen frontier. And we'll dig into their mission objectives. You might be surprised by what they were tasked with accomplishing and how it shaped Britain's presence in Antarctica for the decades to come.
So we've got this team of men sailing toward Antarctica, middle of World War II. Many of them totally unaware where they're going or the real nature of their mission.
Right. It's pretty remarkable to think about, these individuals, a mix of naval personnel and scientists, handpicked by the expedition leader, James Marr. And they're embarking on this journey with really only a vague idea of what they're in for. It wasn't until they were well on their way that the full objectives of Operation Tabarin were unveiled. Establish a permanent British presence in Antarctica to kind of solidify their sovereignty and also to conduct scientific research.
It's interesting that the science was officially a secondary objective. Makes you wonder if it was, more of a convenient justification for what was essentially a strategic territorial play.
Yeah, that's a good observation. And it really speaks to this complex kind of interplay of science and geopolitics that often plays out in these, remote
Hey,
regions.
where did this clandestine mission make its first landing?
Their initial destination was Deception Island, which is an active volcano with a rather unique feature, a flooded caldera that forms a natural harbor.
Deception Island. I've seen pictures. It's a remarkable sight, almost perfectly circular island with this narrow entrance leading into this hidden harbor. Must have been an incredible, albeit, somewhat daunting place to set foot on.
Absolutely. And just imagine the conditions that these men faced. icy winds, freezing temperatures, and, the ever-present challenge of living in these prefabricated huts in such an unforgiving environment. Yet they managed to conduct their scientific observations, map the terrain, and even establish a post office.
Hold on, a post office in Antarctica. That seems a bit excessive, even for a mission focused on asserting sovereignty.
Yeah, at first glance it might, but remember, establishing a sense of what they called effective occupation was key to solidifying a territorial claim. And a post office issuing stamps processing mail, all of that contributed to this idea of, a functioning administered territory under British control.
I see. So it's all part of this strategy of making a tangible, visible statement of ownership. Almost like
Right.
saying, we're not just passing through, we're here to stay.
Precisely. And there was another layer to their activities on Deception Island. Argentina had also been active in the area, and the British team found evidence of their presence.
You mean like Argentine flags or territorial markers?
Exactly. Their first order of business was to remove any trace of Argentine activity. They even went so far as to pack up their discarded flags and send them back to the governor of the Falkland Islands. Kind of a not so subtle message.
I'd say. A clear reminder that Britain considered this to be their territory. But Deception Island was just the first stop, right? Where did Operation Tabarin go next?
Well, their original plan was to establish a second base at Hope Bay, another strategically important location. However, their ships, the Fitzroy and the Scoresby, they encountered really thick sea ice, and it proved impassable.
So they had to adapt,
Yeah.
find an alternative. Facing this obstacle, how did they proceed?
Well, they set their sights on Port Lockroy, which is a natural harbor nestled among the islands near the Antarctic Peninsula. It offered a safe anchorage, relatively accessible terrain, and it had a history of whaling activity.
Port Lockroy. Now that name rings a bell. That's still an active British research station today, isn't it? A lasting legacy of Operation Tabarin.
You are absolutely correct. It really is a testament to the enduring impact of this wartime mission, a link between a rather audacious chapter of World War II history and the ongoing scientific presence in Antarctica.
So they've successfully established bases on Deception Island and Port Lockroy. What exactly were these men doing day in and day out in this incredibly, remote and challenging environment?
Well, survival itself was a significant undertaking, but beyond that, their primary activities were scientific observations, mainly in meteorology mapping and surveying.
And this is a time when mapping and surveying weren't just about, scientific accuracy,
Yeah.
but also about, bolstering territorial claims, right? Those map wars you talked about, where each nation was striving to produce the most detailed and, let's be honest, strategically biased maps
Yeah.
to reinforce their ownership.
Exactly. Their maps weren't just tools of exploration, they were really subtle instruments in this geopolitical struggle for control.
It's fascinating to think that these maps created in such a remote and inhospitable place could have repercussions on the world stage. It really highlights how even the most seemingly insignificant corners of our planet can become entangled in global politics.
Indeed. And alongside their scientific endeavors, there were the everyday routines of base life. Maintaining equipment, communicating with other bases and back to the Falklands. And yes, even running that iconic post office.
I have to admit, the image of a post office in Antarctica still makes me smile. It seems almost absurd. Yet it speaks to that very British blend of pragmatism and a touch of eccentricity.
It certainly does create a fascinating juxtaposition, doesn't it? This incredibly harsh and isolated environment. Yet, these men are clinging to routines and traditions, maintaining a sense of normalcy and connection to the world they left behind.
Must have been a peculiar existence, conducting scientific research, battling the elements, and all the while, keeping a watchful eye out for any signs of encroachment from Argentina or Chile.
Absolutely. They were even given a sovereignty speech to deliver should they encounter any trespassers, a formal reminder that they were on British territory.
Yeah, I imagine those encounters could be tense, even if they remained, cordial on the surface. After all the underlying issue of, who rightfully controlled these vast icy territories was never far from the surface.
You're absolutely right. It was a delicate balancing act, navigating the complexities of scientific exploration, territorial claims, and, potential international friction.
So they spent 2 years, living and working in this extraordinary and often perilous environment. What happened to Operation Tabarin after the war ended? Did it just fade into obscurity, or did it have a lasting impact?
Well, the mission itself was officially disbanded in 1945, but its influence extended far beyond the war years. The British presence in Antarctica continued. It evolved into the Falkland Islands Dependencies Survey.
And that, I suspect, is a story for another time. I'm already intrigued to learn more about how this post-war scientific endeavor unfolded and in how it shaped Britain's role in the Antarctic.
There's certainly a lot more to explore. But before we delve into the legacy of Operation Tabarin and the subsequent Falkland Islands Dependency Survey, let's take a moment to reflect on the mission's broader implications.
Operation Tabarin really highlights how scientific exploration, even in a place as remote as Antarctica, it's rarely just about pure scientific discovery. There are often political and economic motivations kind of intertwined with that quest for knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit upon a really crucial point, I think. Operation Tabarin is such a powerful example of how, scientific research can become a tool, sometimes intentionally, sometimes inadvertently, for, asserting territorial claims and projecting national influence. And it raises some really important questions, I think, about the underlying motivations behind these kinds of endeavors.
Wait, is it really about, advancing scientific knowledge?
Hmm.
Or is it about securing resources, strategic advantage, or maybe just, outmaneuvering rivals? I imagine it's often a complex mix of all of these factors.
Yeah, indeed. And those motivations can be interwoven in ways that are, sometimes difficult to really disentangle. The legacy of Operation Tabarin, I think, serves as a reminder that even in the most, remote corners of our planet, that interplay of science, politics, and national interests is never really far from the surface.
You mentioned that after the war, Operation Tabarin evolved into the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey. Um, I'm curious to learn more about that transition. How did the FIDS build upon the groundwork laid by Operation Tabarin?
Well, one of the interesting things is how the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey, or FIDS as it became known, really tapped into this sense of adventure and romanticism, almost harking back to the heroic age of Antarctic exploration.
You're talking about, legendary figures like Shackleton and Scott, these, iconic explorers who braved unimaginable hardships to reach the South Pole.
Exactly. The FIDS recruitment materials actually specifically called for, keen young men
Hmm.
who were ready to face a test of character and resource. It was a very deliberate appeal to a certain type of individual, someone who was drawn to both scientific discovery and the challenges of exploring the unknown.
So they were seeking a new generation of adventurers,
Hmm.
scientists who were also willing to endure the isolation and the harsh conditions of Antarctica. I can see how that narrative linking back to those almost mythical figures of polar exploration would have been, powerfully alluring.
And that's exactly what they found. These young men driven by a, blend of scientific curiosity and a thirst for adventure, they carried on the work started by Operation Tabarin,
Mm.
mapping, surveying, conducting research in a whole range of fields from geology to botany, and really expanding our understanding of this extraordinary continent.
But I imagine all of this was still happening under the shadow of those, competing territorial claims from Argentina and Chile.
Oh, absolutely. The geopolitical dimension never really went away. In fact, you could argue that it intensified in the years following World War II. Britain, Argentina, and Chile continued to kind of jockey for position, each nation, striving to solidify their claims to Antarctica.
So it seems that Operation Tabarin, despite its seemingly, minor role in the grand scheme of World War II, really had a profound and lasting impact. It shaped the trajectory of scientific research in Antarctica, and it set the stage for this ongoing geopolitical maneuvering that continues to this day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it really underscores the importance of understanding the historical context behind current events. The echoes of Operation Tabarin are still present in the debates surrounding Antarctica's future, its resources, and this delicate balance between international cooperation and national ambition.
Well, I think we've unearthed a truly fascinating and often overlooked piece of history here. Operation Tabarin might have been a footnote in the larger narrative of World War II, but offers this really unique lens, I think, through which to view how, global conflicts can shape even the most remote corners of our planet.
It also reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge, even in a place as seemingly pristine as Antarctica, is often intertwined with these complex political and economic considerations. The legacy of Operation Tabarin, I think, serves as a bit of a cautionary tale, urging us to really, critically examine the motivations and the potential consequences of scientific endeavors, particularly in regions where you have territorial disputes and resource competition at play.
I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Operation Tabarin. It's a story that highlights the complex and often unexpected ways in which global events can shape the course of history, even in the most remote corners of our world.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this has sparked your curiosity about the of the hidden stories that shape our world. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.